Sophia had always felt like something watched her from the shadows, a presence she couldn't quite put her finger on. She brushed it off as an overactive imagination, until the night of her 22nd birthday. That was when it began. It was late, and Sophia sat alone in the small, cluttered library of her family's old Victorian home, a place that had been passed down through generations. Her grandmother had always warned her that some things were better left undiscovered. "We're marked, Sophia," she'd whisper in her thick accent, eyes clouded with a strange fear. But she'd never explain what she meant, and no one in the family dared press her. Sophia sat hunched over an ancient, leather-bound book she'd found hidden in a locked drawer, a book she'd never seen before. She wasn't sure why she was so compelled to open it, but it felt necessary, like a voice in the back of her mind urging her on. As she opened the book, the pages emitted a faint, musty odor, and her fingers tingled strangely as they brushed over the faded ink. The text was written in a language she didn't recognize, symbols that twisted and shifted on the page as though they were alive. Her skin prickled with a sudden chill. Shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally in the corners of the room, shifting and writhing, as if disturbed by her actions. A sense of dread crept over her, a familiar cold weight that pressed heavily against her chest. She tried to ignore it, chalking it up to the late hour, but her pulse quickened as she read the single phrase scrawled in English at the bottom of the page. "The curse shall find you, blood of mine, and feast upon your spirit." A loud crack shattered the silence, echoing down the hall from the parlor. Sophia jumped, dropping the book. Her hands shook, and her breath came in shallow gasps. It was just an old house, she told herself, but something inside her whispered that it was more than that the sound wasn't an accident. With trembling steps, she ventured into the hallway, each step heavier than the last. As she reached the parlor, her heart sank. The air was cold, colder than it should have been, and a sharp, metallic scent lingered, filling her lungs. The clock on the mantel ticked louder, each second echoing ominously through the silence. Her eyes fell upon a photograph on the wall, an image of her ancestor, Elise, the woman her grandmother always refused to speak about. The glass over the photograph was cracked, a single line slicing through Elise's eyes, as if someone had clawed at it. And then, from behind her, came a faint, chilling whisper. She didn't understand the words, but the voice was unmistakably ancient, carrying the weight of centuries. She turned sharply, but the hallway was empty, a dark void stretching into the house's depths. Her heart pounded. She felt the curse like a shadow settling over her, an invisible chain tightening around her neck, binding her to the secrets and sins of the past. And though she tried to steady her breath, she knew this was only the beginning. The witch's curse had reawakened, and it had come for her. The days that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and creeping dread. Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that she was never alone, as though the house itself was watching her, waiting for something. She tried to tell herself it was just paranoia, just stress, but the feeling gnawed at her, sinking deeper with every passing hour. One night, the strange occurrences grew worse. Sophia lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling, when she heard it, a faint scratching noise, as if someone were clawing their way up the walls from the inside. Her body froze, every instinct screaming at her to hide, to run, but there was nowhere to go. The noise grew louder, more frantic, and then it stopped, replaced by a low, throaty whisper. "Sophia," the voice was cold, dripping with hatred. It slithered through the darkness, sliding over her skin like icy fingers. Sophia forced herself to sit up, her hands shaking as she turned on the bedside lamp. The pale glow did nothing to dispel the oppressive shadows pooling in the corners of her room. Trembling, she called out, "Who's there?" No answer came, but as she listened, her heart pounding in her ears, she heard it again, the whisper, closer this time, just by her bed. "Sophia, blood of mine, you cannot escape." Sophia's throat closed up. She wanted to scream, to run, but her body was rooted to the bed, paralyzed by fear. Her mind raced back to the tales she'd overheard as a child, whispered fragments about Elise, her ancestor who had dared to cross a witch. It was said Elise had stolen something from the witch, a charm, a relic of some kind, a token that granted unimaginable power. In her fury, the witch had cursed Elise's bloodline, vowing that every descendant would suffer the weight of her vengeance. Sophia had never believed those stories until now. The lamp flickered, the shadows swirling as if alive. A cold wind whipped through the room, and the pages of the leather-bound book on her nightstand fluttered open. She watched in horror as the pages turned, landing on a picture she hadn't noticed before, a sketch of a woman, her face twisted in agony, hands clawing at her own skin. Above her, written in stark, angular text, was a single word: repentance. Sophia felt a tear slip down her cheek as the woman in the picture seemed to come to life, her inked eyes rolling upward, locking onto Sophia's. A guttural scream escaped the woman's mouth, filling Sophia's ears, echoing through the empty halls of the house. Desperate, Sophia tried to slam the book shut, but her fingers passed right through it, as if it were no longer solid. A shiver ran down her spine as the voice, that horrible, raspy whisper, returned, filling her mind with words that weren't her own, visions she couldn't escape. She saw Elise, her ancestor, running through a dark forest, clutching a talisman wrapped in torn cloth. Branches clawed at her, ripping her dress, leaving trails of blood down her arms as she stumbled, the shadows around her alive and hungering for her fear. Elise stopped by a river, her chest heaving, and with a final, desperate look, she tossed the talisman into the dark waters, her last defiance against the witch. But a flash of fire split the sky, illuminating the witch's face, twisted, seething with rage. Her bony hand pointed to Elise, her words slicing through the night like blades. "If I cannot claim you, then I shall claim your blood. Your descendants will know my wrath, and I will feed on their fear for all eternity." The vision faded, and Sophia found herself back in her room, gasping for breath. She clutched her chest, feeling the faint, icy residue of the curse seeping into her skin. Her body was damp with sweat, her heart pounding painfully in her ribcage. She stumbled to her feet, the room swaying around her, and caught her reflection in the mirror across the room. But it wasn't her face staring back at her. It was Elise, her eyes wide with terror, her mouth open in a silent scream. Sophia staggered back, clutching her head as the whispers began again, relentless, droning. The voice was no longer just an echo. It was inside her, winding through her thoughts, filling her with fear and despair. And the curse, the dark, inescapable curse that had plagued her family for centuries, had found her a new victim in its terrible, unbroken cycle. And this time, she knew there would be no escaping it. The following days were an unending spiral of fear and sleepless nights. Sophia barely ate, barely slept. Shadows moved where they shouldn't, and she would catch glimpses of faces, gaunt, hollow-eyed faces, in the mirrors and windows, each one staring with an intensity that made her skin crawl. She knew they weren't real, but that knowledge brought no comfort. She could feel them waiting, watching, eager for her to unravel completely. On the fourth night, she couldn't take it any longer. She needed answers. With a flashlight in hand, she descended into the basement, a place she had always avoided, as if some instinctive fear had warned her against it. Now, though, her desperation overpowered her fear, and she forced herself to step down, the creaky stairs echoing with each footfall. The basement was cold and damp, the air thick with an earthy smell that clung to her nostrils. Flicking her flashlight around, Sophia caught sight of old trunks, cobwebs draping over them like shrouds, and strange markings carved into the walls, symbols she couldn't decipher, yet somehow recognized. Her flashlight flickered, and then, in the dark silence, she heard it again. The voice. It was sharper now, a rasping whisper that grew louder, piercing through her thoughts. Words overlapped, images of Elise and the witch flashing through her mind like scenes from a nightmare. The beam of her flashlight settled on an old, cracked mirror leaning against the far wall. Sophia moved closer, her heart thundering as she saw a message scratched into the mirror's surface. each letter deep and jagged, like claws had gouged them into the glass. Blood binds. Find what was taken, or the curse shall feast. Underscore. Sophia's pulse quickened as she tried to understand. What could it mean? What had Elise taken? The vision of her ancestor running with the talisman came back to her. The shadowed forest, the river, and Elise's desperate, fearful gaze. Sophia knew, then, that if she had any hope of breaking the curse, she needed to find this talisman. It was the only piece of the puzzle left, the only thing the witch still hungered for. Her flashlight dimmed, and just as she turned to leave the basement, the air grew cold, biting through her clothes and sending a chill deep into her bones. She felt a presence behind her, its breath hot on her neck. Sophia spun around, her light illuminating a face mere inches from hers. It was Elise. The apparition's eyes were wide, pupils black as pitch, skin pale and stretched thin over bones. Her mouth twisted in terror as she reached out, her translucent hand passing through Sophia's arm. "Run, Sophia," she whispered, her voice echoing as if from the depths of a long-buried grave. "She is coming. She won't stop until she has what I took." The flashlight sputtered and went out, plunging Sophia into darkness. She fumbled in the pitch black, her hands grazing cold walls, her heart hammering as she stumbled blindly toward the stairs. Her foot caught on something, and she fell, the weight of the dark pressing in around her. She felt fingers, icy and skeletal, wrap around her ankle, tugging her back toward the mirror. "No," she gasped, kicking desperately, feeling the cold grip tighten. With a final, frantic burst of energy, she pulled herself free, scrambling up the stairs as the whispers rose in a chorus behind her, a cacophony of voices, some pleading, some screaming, others laughing with a twisted joy. She burst into the kitchen, slamming the basement door behind her, her breaths ragged and shallow. The house was quiet again, but she felt no peace. The whispers lingered in her mind, clinging like cobwebs, a relentless reminder that she was in the grasp of something far beyond her control. In the dim light of the kitchen, she noticed the old family locket on the counter, a keepsake her grandmother had always worn. She picked it up, her fingers tracing its cold, ornate design, and felt a strange pulse within, as if something alive lay within the metal. Opening it, she found a folded piece of paper inside. With trembling hands, she unfolded it and read the words hastily scrawled there. "Only at the river's edge will the curse end. But beware, for she guards it still." Underscore. Sophia's blood ran cold. She knew now what she had to do. She would go to the river, to the place Elise had made her last stand. But fear clawed at her heart, a sickening certainty that she was walking into a trap. The witch was waiting for her, and there was no telling if she would come back. Yet, she had no choice. The voices, the shadows, the suffocating dread. It would only end if she faced what waited by the river. Sophia waited until dawn to leave. She didn't want to face whatever lay ahead in the dark, though every instinct told her light would offer little protection. Armed with her grandmother's locket and the old book tucked under her arm, she made her way through the misty woods behind the house. The forest was quiet, an unnatural stillness settling over it, as if every creature sensed the evil lingering nearby. Shadows loomed from every angle, twisted branches stretching like skeletal fingers reaching for her. As she approached the river, the air grew colder, her breath puffing visibly in front of her face. The riverbank was silent, its water dark and still. It looked nothing like she remembered. Where once the water had flowed clear, there was now a deep, murky blackness that seemed to absorb all light. The river's surface rippled, though there was no breeze, and Sophia felt a prickle of dread crawl up her spine. She took a step closer, clutching the locket tightly. Her fingers trembled as she opened it once more, her eyes drawn to the worn scrap of paper with its ominous warning. "Only at the river's edge will the curse end. But beware, for she guards it still." Suddenly, the wind picked up, whipping her hair across her face, carrying with it the faint sound of laughter, a hollow, mirthless chuckle that echoed through the trees. Sophia's heart leapt, and she spun around, searching for the source. From the mist, A figure emerged on the opposite bank, cloaked in shadow, her eyes burning with a vengeful fire. It was the witch. Her skin was pale and cracked, like ancient porcelain, and her mouth twisted into a cruel smile. She raised a bony hand, pointing directly at Sophia. "You have come at last," the witch hissed, her voice slithering through the air like smoke. "The last of Elise's blood. You will pay the debt she left unpaid." Sophia's throat tightened, but she forced herself to speak. "What did Elise take from you?" she demanded, her voice trembling. "Why are you doing this to us?" The witch's eyes gleamed, a bitter, wrathful gleam that spoke of centuries of hatred. "She stole my heart," the witch replied, her voice dripping with venom. "My talisman, my source of power. She took it, thinking she could break me. But she only delayed her fate and that of every daughter born of her line." With a sweeping gesture, the witch's hand hovered over the water. The river's surface churned, and from the depths, something began to rise. Sophia watched in horror as a small, silver locket emerged, dripping with dark water, suspended midair by some unseen force. It looked ancient, worn with age, yet glowed faintly with a sinister light. Sophia felt a sudden, inexplicable pull toward it. She knew, somehow, that this was the talisman Elise had thrown into the river, the object of the witch's unrelenting fury. "Take it," the witch sneered, her eyes narrowing. "Hold the curse in your own hands." Sophia hesitated, every instinct screaming at her to run. But the voices from the basement echoed in her mind, the images of Elise, her haunted eyes pleading for release. Sophia felt the weight of her family's suffering pressing down on her, the knowledge that she was the only one who could put an end to it. Steeling herself, she stepped forward, her fingers brushing the icy surface of the locket. The moment she touched it, a wave of darkness surged through her, filling her with Elise's memories, her fear, her anguish, and finally, her desperate act of defiance. Sophia saw the witch's fury, her curse, and the dark promise she had made, to consume every life that sprang from Elise's blood, to savor each one's suffering. As Sophia's fingers closed around the locket, the witch let out a high, keening wail, her face contorting with rage. The river bubbled and roiled, and the earth itself seemed to shake. But then, something unexpected happened. The locket began to warm in Sophia's hand, its heat seeping into her skin, filling her with a strange strength. She felt Elise's spirit, a protective warmth that wrapped around her like a shield, and she understood what she had to do. With a sudden burst of clarity, Sophia opened her grandmother's locket, placing it over the witch's talisman. She whispered a prayer, not for herself, but for Elise, for the countless souls that had suffered because of this curse. She let her blood touch the metal, a final, defiant act to bind the curse back to its creator. The witch shrieked, a sound so piercing that it seemed to tear through the very fabric of reality. Her form flickered, fading in and out as the curse recoiled upon her, its malevolence consuming her. She stumbled, her fiery eyes dimming, her skeletal hand reaching out in one last, desperate grasp. "No," she rasped, her voice breaking. "This is not how it ends." But it was. The river swallowed her up, pulling her down into its depths, her form dissolving into the darkness below, until there was nothing left but silence. Sophia staggered back, clutching both lockets in her hand, her breath coming in gasps. The air felt lighter, the oppressive weight lifted, and for the first time in days, she could breathe freely. She knew, in her bones, that the curse had been broken, that the witch's hold over her family had finally ended. But as she stood there, she couldn't shake the feeling that something still lingered, a shadow of darkness that would remain with her forever, a reminder of the generations of suffering that had come before. In the days that followed, Sophia tried to adjust to life without the ever-present dread, but the experience had left her scarred. The faces in the mirrors and the whispers in the dark were gone, yet there was a strange emptiness, like a missing piece that left a hollow ache in her soul. One evening, as she sifted through her grandmother's belongings, Sophia found a small, weathered journal buried in the bottom of a dusty chest. Her grandmother had kept meticulous notes on the family's history, scribbling down details of strange happenings, dreams, and the twisted legacy of the curse. On the final page was a chilling entry written in her grandmother's unsteady hand. The witch's power is bound, but darkness never dies. The debt is paid, but the blood remembers. Sophia's fingers trembled as she read the words. The thought that the curse could leave a permanent mark on her soul was almost too much to bear. But she couldn't deny it. In the quiet hours of the night, she felt it, a lingering shadow in her mind, a distant echo of the witch's fury. She'd broken the curse, but some part of it had stayed with her, a residue of the dark magic that had plagued her family for centuries. That night, Sophia had a dream, more vivid than any she'd had before. She stood by the river, the dark waters churning and bubbling. Across the bank, where the witch had once stood, was Elise, her ancestor, her face no longer twisted in fear, but serene and relieved. "Thank you, Sophia," Elise's voice echoed, soft but filled with gratitude. "You freed us all." Sophia felt warmth flood through her, a healing light that washed away some of the darkness still clinging to her spirit. She reached out, but before she could touch her ancestor, Elise's form shimmered, fading into the mist. In her place, a small, flickering light appeared, hovering above the river's surface. The light moved closer, floating across the water until it hovered just before her. Sophia extended her hand, and the light settled in her palm, its warmth seeping into her skin. The moment it touched her, a voice filled her mind, clear and reassuring. "You carry my strength now, Sophia. You are free." When she awoke, the morning sun was spilling through the window, bathing her room in soft, golden light. For the first time, Sophia felt a true sense of peace, as though the weight of the curse had finally lifted. Yet something had indeed changed, a strange awareness that lingered at the edge of her senses, not a burden, but a presence. As the days turned to weeks, Sophia discovered that she had inherited something far more than peace. She could sense things now, subtle shifts in the air, emotions that drifted from those around her like invisible threads. She could see traces of things hidden to others, memories embedded in old places, ancient echoes lingering in dark corners. It was as if Elise's spirit, freed from the curse, had left Sophia a gift, a legacy, not of suffering, but of resilience and insight. With time, Sophia came to understand this gift as her inheritance, a strength forged from generations of survival against the witch's darkness. She knew she could not escape the past entirely. It had left its mark, a scar that would stay with her forever. But it no longer felt like a curse. Rather, it was a reminder of her family's triumph, a silent testament to her own strength. And so, Sophia moved forward, her life no longer plagued by shadows, but guided by a strange and powerful connection to the world around her. She had become the keeper of her family's legacy, the final guardian of their story, and the last bearer of the curse's memory. And as she closed the journal, a single thought echoed in her mind, as if spoken by Elise herself. "Remember, Sophia, darkness can be defeated, but only by those brave enough to face it." And with that, Sophia turned the page, ready to write a new chapter, free at last from the curse that had bound her bloodline for so many lifetimes.